My conversation today is with Michael Byng from England. He has been very much involved in various high-speed rail projects around the world, including, of course, HS2 in the UK, but also high-speed rail projects in the Middle East. He's a quantity surveyor by trade. Some people will call it cost estimator. And he has learned lots of lessons in high-speed rail over the years that he is happy to share with us in this episode. I hope you enjoy, and if you do, please like, share and subscribe. But now enjoy my conversation with Michael Byng. And so that's running now. That's good, because I did forget to press the record button in the past. So that's lesson learned. Yeah, continuous improvement. So, and now we can basically smile in the camera and then we get rolling. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Frank. It's great to be with you again. And let's see what we learn from high-speed rail.
Yes, we had a previous podcast episode on high-speed rail, which I found already very insightful, and I will link this previous episode at the end of this one here. This time we started by you getting in touch with me and saying, well, what's going on in Australia? I'm thinking to get involved in some shape or form, but I'm a bit concerned that the wrong people may offer their consulting services. So much of a background. And with that, I want to hand over to you and take it from there. Take it away, Michael.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I have indeed been asked to offer advice and get involved with the Australian high-speed rail project between Sydney and Newcastle, New South Wales. But I have some reservations for the simple reason I'm not sure that everybody in the supply chain has learned the lessons from around the world. But I'm pleased to see when I read the business case for the Australian high-speed rail project that certainly Tim Parker and his staff have learned lessons and putting the building blocks in place for a successful project. The problem then becomes, are the people in the supply chain invested in it? Are they going to deliver those ambitions which are important to Australia's economy and not deviate? I'm sure the people who set things up in Europe and elsewhere had those ambitions when they started. But if I'm allowed to be slightly controversial, for heaven's sake, that got hijacked along the way by the supply chain. So there are lessons to be learned and to take on from the Australian high-speed rail business case to make sure you have a successful outcome for the project. The first thing is the business case itself, and that's very, very fundamental. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And how do you put it together? And that's a mixture of many things. It's not just simply construction, which I normally deal with. It's also the wider economic benefits to the project, what you're going to do to the economy of the two areas, Sydney and Newcastle. What do you want to achieve? Having got that clear in your mind and basically firmed it up so that it doesn't start to creep, it doesn't start to wander, you then have to decide how you're going to do it. What sort of traction you're going to use, what sort of speed you're going to use, and high speed in turn becomes almost pejorative. High speed, as we've tried in Europe at 400 kilometers an hour, is horrendously expensive. I'm very impressed to see that Tim Parker is proposing 360 kilometers an hour on the straight and 200 kilometers an hour in tunnels, because that makes a lot more sense in terms of construction costs. And if the service is planned properly, which I'm sure it will be, it'll provide an excellent service between Sydney and Newcastle and vice versa. The first thing is to define the business case properly and stick with it.
Just to correct this, Michael, the operational speed will be 320. So if you read 360, that might have been the design speed, but the operational speed is 320. But other than that, it's spot on what you said. We are deliberately avoiding in Australia to try to be the fastest in the world and having it cost a fortune to get there, as some other projects have done recently or currently, I should say.
Yeah, that's actually true. I mean, we're going through an exercise in the UK trying to reduce cost of HS2 by reducing speeds and reducing trend. But I think the business case in Australia is spot on. It is there. We have to hold the line now. And the biggest problem for Tim and his staff are holding the line with the supply chain, because the supply chain will want the project to go and develop, and people get their enthusiasm occasionally gets carried away with them, and you finish up with design development in the middle of your project if you're not careful. So there we are. We've got the business case together. We know how we're going to do it. The first thing before we start digging holes in the ground and filling them with concrete is to look at the traction and the railway control systems. Those two are an integral part of any major project, and they've tended in previous years to be left to the end, which is the wrong way round. You've got to decide about your traction and your railway control systems at the start. How does the toy train set work? Having done that, you're a long way away. You can then decide how you're going to procure your traction and your rolling stock, so you don't finish up, as has happened elsewhere, where they've built a railway and then what are we going to run on it? And you finish up with a delay at the end, having spent a lot of money on civil engineering works, and then having to wait time while you procure traction. Is the contraction compatible with the rolling stock? So I think, go back to the business case, it's online, it's going, so let's go. The other thing then, when you get into the process, is to understand problems which exist all over the world and program for them and plan for them. The first thing is the acquisition of land for the railway corridor. Is the legal processes take a long time, whether you have compulsory purchase processes or sequestration. People will always resist giving up land and everything else. The minute they start resisting, you finish up in the negotiation, both sides professionally represented. What then happens, excuse me, you then find that there are insufficient professionals to run the process. So the whole process of land acquisition extends and the project starts to go out of time before we've even acquired any land to start. Let's assume you've addressed the land acquisition either in the legislation that allows you to build this railway or by arrangement with the parties involved. You've then got to decide, the big lessons learned is how you acquire the land. And the first thing is, even before you start building, you do need access to land for site investigation and geotechnical engineering. And that's essential if you're going to have a robust design. Occasionally, people have overlooked that and assume that simple land acquisition is the answer. If you take a simple view instead of a two-stage view of land acquisition, what then happens is, once you think the process, your project is starting, your time is spent in doing ground investigations and everything else, which affect your design. And again, it pushes your program out and your costs up. So a structured approach to land acquisition, whether it be permanent land acquisition, whether it be temporary land acquisition, or whether it is simply acquisition, the rights to enter land for geotechnical examinations and things like that. That being the case, what is the definition of land acquisition? The other problems we've seen it in Peru, we've seen it in India, we've seen it in the UK, is land can have many users. You can have the beneficial owner, the freehold owner in the UK. You can have a leasehold interest as well. You can have a property on the land which is rented out to somebody who's running a business. You then find the land that contains rights of access for a third party to go from one side of your proposed railway corridor to the other for their business or for their water or their power or their gas. All of those need to be resolved. Now, one of the things the one things I can take to you from HS2 phase 1 in the UK, in the original book of reference of land interests, there were 4,800 interests. In actual fact, there were 18,900 when they were properly investigated. So now, how do we get over that? I'm developing systems with AI, which I'd like to bring to Australia, where we basically look at the mapping system, the utilities system, and AI will look at the route and throw all of these things up. So we effectively are using a digital process to replace the analog ones that have existed previously. We identified our railway corridor. We identify all the issues we've got to do to create the railway corridor. We allow ourselves access to geotechnical engineering. So we're ready to start when we want to go. So that's the first issue. Before we've got anywhere near building a railway, we've acquired the land for the railway corridor, and we've done all the things we need to do in it to open the corridor and to investigate how we're going to build in it. Very important. That's been missed elsewhere, not because of negligence or incompetence. It's just, it is very, very complicated. Major railways have not generally been built, certainly in Britain or in Europe, in places since after the Second World War, and land usage has in that time become very, very complicated. The use of land has proliferated. So when you come to open it up, it's not like it was 80 or 100 years ago. There are a lot more interests to contain. So those have to be dealt with before we can start. And I believe that the Australian business case reflects that. Having decided upon a corridor, and to decide upon the corridor is interesting as well. It may not be just a straight line. One of the things that makes the business case for high-speed rail is not just what you get through the fare box, it's the wider economic benefits along the route around transport centres and transport hubs. And it may be expedient, and I think it's lessons learned from elsewhere, is to make sure that whilst your route may appear to deviate, it takes in centres which will benefit economically from the development itself, which gives you a wider economic benefit outside the railway usage itself, and it improves the BCR for the thing completely. If I'm allowed to just talk to HS2 for a moment, when that was looked at properly, the wider economic benefits, they increased from 1.1 to just over 2. If you look at the benefits of the big areas created around the interchanges, the connections with the airports and things like that, destinations that you go to. So there we are. So we've created our route. We've chosen strategically our route. It may not be to the complete liking of railway professionals, but if this state-funded proposal is to get maximum benefit for the taxpayers of Australia, then you've got to get all the benefits involved. Apart from just the travel, you've got to get all the wider economic benefits as well. The other benefits as well, which come out of choosing the route, you might find that you get land sliced out of the wilderness or green belt, as we would call it, by the route passing through. And it effectively creates a change of use. The most obvious ones are land which was deemed not suitable or not allowed, permitted for development, comes into development rights, and it allows you to build houses and build communities as well, mainly because of the slicing effect of the route. So all of those things need to be taken into account when you're considering your railway and what you do, and also how you sell it to the public, because I've listened to the debate, I've seen the feedback from the various events to promote the high-speed rail project in the UK, in Australia. And I detect, whilst there's a great enthusiasm for it, as witnessed by the business case, excuse me, you also have the doubters, and the way, in my opinion, having been a doubter in the past about high-speed rail, but how you promote it, is to convince the doubters of the total economic benefits of this, what it actually does. Not just a railway. It's not just a railway. It's an economic development project. That's what we're trying to do. It's in the national interest, so let's do it. So those are lessons to be learned, which I hope Australia does do. And I hope investors along the route between Sydney and Newcastle, New South Wales, actually invest, create developments, take opportunities created by the railway for the benefit of the economy as a whole. So we've created the route.
Yeah, I have been one of the doubters myself, but with a concrete background. So I'm coming from Europe, coming from Germany. I'm a big fan of high-speed rail generally, but I always said I'm a fan of high-speed rail where it makes sense. So from the start, I said in order to get behind high-speed rail in Australia, it needs to make sense. And I think a lot of the stuff that I have seen in the business case, and I had Tim Parker on the podcast recently talking to him, a lot of the stuff that I have seen and heard does make sense. And you mentioned the geologic investigation of the land of the corridor where the high-speed rail will go, and I think they've got already a lot of geological investigations as part of the business case to identify a suitable route for the tunneling between Sydney and Gosford. And I also think that Tim Parker, from his previous role at Sydney Metro, has a lot of experience with different ground conditions for tunneling anyway. So the importance of that, making sure that the ground is really suitable for proper tunnel boring. But also in the open air, city metro also leads through areas where floodplains of rivers are, like overflow areas of rivers and so on, where they need to elevate and they need to build the elevation in a way that it doesn't get flooded away and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure he is aware of that, and my impression is that he really has this trickling down into the organization. They seem to be very much in tune with what's required there. Their biggest problem at the moment, I think, is that they don't have the horsepower to do the, and maybe not the knowledge base either, to do the project definition phase themselves. So they are required to get support from advisors for various functions, and they're currently in the process of testing out the market and then procuring those advisory services. And I think that's where the trick will be, to make sure that the advisory activities are controlled along the lines of what the High Speed Rail Authority wants to achieve, and not having the advisors going off on a tangent and starting doing their own thing. I think that's kind of what I understood from you, what one of the risks is.
Oh, well, it is a huge risk. I mean, with respect, professional fees are totally out of control with HS2 in the UK. I mean, it's embarrassing for what it is.
Yeah.
Mainly because, and you can say, was there a proper business case at the start? There probably wasn't. But in the case where you have a robust business case like Sydney, Newcastle, New South Wales, there's no reason for veering from the script. It's there to be done, and they've got to stick to it and do it, and make sure they buy into the original concept. What you can't have, and we've had this in other parts of the world, consultants get involved with projects, but they also start to have the doubt creep into them as well. What if? Is this the right thing to do? And it does actually deflect them from delivering the proposal that the client actually wants. So you've got to make sure everybody's on the same page, singing from the same hymn sheet, excuse the cliches, but it is vitally important. The other thing is you have to make sure that you manage the consultants properly. Everybody talks about managing contractors, target cost, everything else. But managing consultants is the biggest problem of them all, because basically, to use Parkinson's law, they will extend work to the money available to pay for it, unless you set clear guidelines as to what they've got to do. What have you got to deliver? This is the piece of work you've got to do to get us to this stage. And that comes on to the 3 tiers of management that are required with major projects, which are certainly lessons learned from the world. I may be stating the blindingly obvious, but there are 3 levels. There is cost management, which is where I come from originally. There's project management for individual sections of the work or disciplines. The other thing, which everybody underestimates the importance of, not necessarily the cost, is program management, to make sure all of these efforts are coordinated. Everybody's moving in the same direction at the same time. You don't want a situation where you've got a whole, the hordes of the supply chain where the people at the front say forward and the people at the back say back, and it just becomes chaotic. You've all got to move at the same time. And that is, I've been a consultant all my life, but that criticism of sticking to the script, delivering what you're supposed to delivering as required by the program, is of absolute paramount importance, because if that goes wrong, the contractors, the people who are actually going to build this railway for you, build the rolling stock and operate it, are left waiting for it to start. And again, you go back to the UK, where we've spent £36 billion in 13 years on HS2 phase 1, and we haven't laid a single metre of track. You can't. The other side, having appeared to be critical of the UK, it can be done. I mean, the classic thing, if anybody goes to Marylebone, in London Marylebone Station, which is the terminus of the original Great Central Railway in London, the Act of Parliament for that was granted at the end of 1893, and the whole railway was finished by 1899, including between 1896 and 7, digging up Lord's Cricket Ground, putting a cut and cover tunnel in, and replacing the pitch for the start of the 1897 season. So it can be done if we're all on the same script. Yeah. And it is important, I would emphasise to Tim and Tim Parkinson's team, please control your consultants. Make sure you write their briefs and not allow them to write the brief for you, because otherwise costs of time will just expand and you run the risk of getting away from the scope. Because what we talk about with business case, going back to the start, is a robust business case is based upon a clearly defined scope. So you don't finish up with scope creep and things like that, either in consultancy or construction or mechanical engineering. So that's the big thing there. If we've done all those things correctly, I was interested from the business case to see that they talk about sectional work and target cost contracts. That creates big alarm bells for me, because basically target cost contracts are suitable where you're creating the railway corridor, where you've got to move utilities or you've got to divert rivers and things like that. It's very difficult to put a fixed price on that. But once you've actually created the railway corridor and you've done the difficult enabling works, there is no reason why you can't have lump sum contracts with competent contractors, which give, to use a phrase Mark Wilder's used before Parliament in London, it gives commercial tension then, the incentive for the team to deliver the project economically and well as making a profit for themselves. It's very, very important that that goes. If you lose momentum, if scope starts to creep, if there's no real strong program management, that's when your costs and your program delivery really start to go out of time, and it causes terrific financial and political embarrassment. And you'll then find, if you don't control the program strongly, the naysayers will then start complaining about the project once it's underway. And the effect on the morale of people working on that is very, very poor indeed. So you've got to keep momentum going. You've got a strong business case there. You've got to maintain that business case and deliver it. Then if the naysayers see the project moving along progressively, things are happening, then their qualms tend to fade away. Yes, this is going to happen. Perhaps I was wrong. Let's see how it is then. If it just goes into, what's the word I would look for? If it just goes into sort of chaos, one would say, for a better word, if you lose momentum, if you lose that project, then the naysayers will get worse over the time, and it gets more difficult for the people working on the project to deliver. So there we are. Go back to, in developing the designs, developing the work, the documents required to construct it, we have to stay focused, deliver within time, deliver reasonably, so that the contractors have got the best opportunity there is to deliver this project well. Because if you deliver it well, experience tells us that will encourage us to deliver other projects. To extend this, we might actually go to Brisbane, we may actually go to Canberra and Melbourne, because they see the success of the first one. It's not just delivering one project, it's creating confidence in the supply chain that it can deliver and make a profit at a reasonable cost to the public, and it gives people who would be considering schemes confidence they can have similar schemes elsewhere. You create an industry, and you're actually developing your own economy in Australia. Then that's the point. You're creating an economy. Well, I'll come to that point. I mean, if we look at major infrastructure, rail infrastructure projects around the world, a lot of them have been delivered, especially in Africa, by expats and things like that, people like that, without any thought of what you're putting into the local economy. High-speed rail in Australia, this first scheme, is a huge opportunity to build your own railway engineering capabilities up, to invest in young people, to give them hope for the future, ambition for the future, that they can go on and, if delivered successfully, go on from high-speed, the first phase of high-speed rail, to deliver it elsewhere to the benefit of the economy. So that's, you can argue that is actually one of the other wider economic benefits, the financial benefit, which is intangible. So that's where we are. We come now to start to build it. Quite simply, there is no reason for railways, which are largely very repetitive works. After all a railway is two beams, the rails on a series of beams, the bearers, going over and under bridges, which we've been doing since 1825. So there's no reason why we can't define those properly, give them in sections to a contractor or a series of contractors, deliver sequentially, properly managed under project management and program management, and bring our scheme forward. That then leads us to the business end, which is the railway systems you're going to buy, permanent way, signalling, electrification. We need to give I don't know where this is going to be sourced from for Australian high-speed rail, but the lead-in times for railway control systems, traction and overhead line are quite considerable because the limited number of contractors who can actually do it. So the better we get on with the creating the corridor, the better opportunity we have to engage with the railway control systems people to get the best price for that.
When it comes to your training on advanced signaling and train control, nothing beats a good quality. That's why I partnered with the Informa Connect Academy to create 7 fantastic online trainings that I believe are the best and most comprehensive portfolio of online trainings in this space in the entire world. You see the 7 trainings that I'm offering through Informa in the boxes here. And you also see at the very top a web link where you can find information on all of these training courses. If the education and your personal development in the field of advanced train control is of any importance to you, I recommend highly that you check it out. And I would look forward very much to welcome you in one of these training courses. All of them have interactive elements, so we can actually meet face to face in those trainings, even though they are online courses. It needs to be seen to be believed. And now back to the conversation. Let me stop you there for a moment. It sounds very simplistic the way you said it. It's basically just 2 rails on a few sleepers and so on. But people may argue, wait a minute, nothing that we ever built in Australia was built for speeds like that. So is it really the same to build a railway for 160 kilometers per hour or for 360 kilometers per hour, which will be probably the design speed in order to get operational speed of 320. Is it the same, or is there some education needed about the differences between how we used to build rail in Australia and what's actually required for a high-speed system, in your view?
There is a difference and there is a learning curve, but that learning curve and the education needs to be done before we start designing and building. What difference are there in the standards, clearances, minimum radius curves, alignments of high-speed rail going over bridges and viaduct? That has to be learned at the start, not, as I've seen it elsewhere, not only in the UK, where consultants learn on the job whilst the thing is in progress and costs again start to escalate. That educational system or educational process of better standards, high-speed standards, needs to be understood from the start and imbued in the people who are going to do the design and the construction. All I would say is once they've learned the standards, understand the standards, I'd stand by what I said about it being fairly standardized and repetitive. It's just that the standards are different.
Yeah, and again, your previous point that the initial section is really decisive because it builds the case and it builds the trust that the people building it, delivering it, know what they're doing. Yeah, and I think there's a bit of a balance required. On the one hand, not underestimating the task of high-speed rail, being different from conventional rail, shall we say, but on the other hand, not getting too scared. Yeah, like, everything must be terribly complicated and we need millions of hours of consulting time to tell us how it might be done because it's so super complicated. So it should be taken seriously that it might be not entirely the same, but it's something that can be learned, and then it really becomes repetitive, as you said, once we are through the learning curve. So I don't think there's a reason to be scared of, but it needs to be taken with the necessary seriousness.
That's absolutely true. And young people coming out of university who are enthusiastic about this, they see careers in civil engineering, mechanical engineering, civil engineering. It's their future. They'll
Hmm.
invest in it. They've spent a lot of time at university. They're looking forward to a career. They want to get into it. They want to make a reasonable living and having a career out of this, and also contribute to their country's economy. And that's one of
And
the huge
and
opportunities.
and honestly, it's a cool project to work on. Yeah, if that doesn't attract people to the industry, then I don't know what does. Yeah, so if you, for anybody coming from university and considering in the slightest going into railway, being involved in a high-speed rail program must be pretty much the coolest thing there is. Yeah, I mean, Australia does some very interesting projects. Sydney Metro is certainly also a very groundbreaking thing. Melbourne does something similar with the suburban rail loop. The stuff that's happening in Perth is very interesting and probably top notch, including the biggest CBTC project in the world. Um, yeah, so there, but still from a profile point of view, I still think high speed rail beats pretty much everything else.
I agree with you totally. And the opportunities, I looked at the business case where uh, it says that basically the operation is supported by its revenue, which is good. Capital cost is presumably debt funded by the state. But the other opportunities in design you can, if you get the scope right at the start, is to design for the whole life cycle cost of it, to design it so it's economical and easy to maintain through its life cycle, instead of just producing a project and somebody saying, well, how much is it going to cost us to maintain over its life cycle? It's got a defined life cycle, and that also has to be fed in at prototype stage through the designers. The design and the estimates of cost need to reflect construction of both civil engineering, railway control systems, traction, which allow for economical maintenance of it and planned maintenance through its life cycle. Because the worst thing you want is to actually build something, which I've seen in Africa and I've seen in, excuse me, Southeast Asia, where they build something and then it immediately becomes unreliable. So the euphoria of a new scheme is dissipated very quickly through it doesn't work. So there's a lot to be gained into, and that's what I think excites university students and people like that, the chance to be really involved in something. Yes, they're involved in a project design, but they're also designing a system and a process which has got long-term consequences.
Yes, and it offers long-term perspectives as well. I mean, building the entire high-speed rail network end to end, what's currently planned, like from Melbourne via Canberra via Sydney all the way up to Brisbane, and then maybe even further to the Sunshine Coast or so. Um, that would take decades. So it's not like people go into railways, they work 5 years on high-speed rail, and that's the end of the line, and they need to find something else. There's people who learn how to do this kind of project properly, they will have a career future, a long-term career future, which I also think should be very exciting. Yeah, if you work on a job that excites you, having a long-term prospect there is pretty much the best that can happen, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the problem with construction traditionally, it's been almost itinerant. It's not particularly attractive. Excuse me. Um, there is a long-term future in this project, both for the project itself and for the people working on it. The young people coming in today, the people coming out of university, are the senior managers of the succeeding phases in years to come. Bring them through this successfully. Use it almost as an educational process. Then you are built up to do the next phases. Where you go next. They'll have learnt all of the things I've talked about. You can then have an informed discussion. Once you've built one, you then tend to have an informed discussion about where you go thereafter. The problem with the prototype is everybody's got a view of what the prototype looks like. If you build the first one successfully, and this, Sydney Newcastle is it's not particularly long. It's an opportunity to get it right and show that it can be done. It's a huge opportunity if the government's prepared to invest in it, to get it right, get it done properly, and then look where we go elsewhere.
Yes. Yes. You are a quantity surveyor by education, and we did talk about cost factors for high-speed rail in the first episode that we did together. Nonetheless, one of my biggest points of concern was the tendency, not just for big rail projects here in Australia, but also for high-speed rail projects in various countries, including the UK and North America and so on, to overshoot the budget by significant factors. I'm talking times 2, times 3, something like that. And for a project this size, which will be in the hundreds of millions, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars anyhow, if you look at the entire network, a cost overrun by several 100% would be catastrophic and could be catastrophic for the entire national economy. So the key question for me really is, how do you make sure that the budget estimate, the initial budget estimate that was presented in the business case, which will be refined now in the project definition phase, which is coming now, how can this be made reliable so that the project delivery really has a fair chance to stick to it and achieve the budget expectation?
The first thing is in the development phase, one has to have a proper system of cost planning in quantity surveying terms, where as the project comes off the drawing board, it's measured, good old-fashioned measurement, analysed and priced in accordance with the elements that make up a railway. That gives you an elemental cost analysis, which enables you to compare it with the original budget, and it also enables you to compare it with other schemes around the world. Are we on track? Are we doing the same as they are in Poland, in the Czech Republic? Are we doing the same as they've done in France? And the whole point is to make sure that the estimates are produced, I would like to say, using a thing called the Railway Method of Measurement, which I originally wrote in North Sydney in 2008, 2009, and has now gone into the UK, because that creates a common cost language, which means we can look how much a single track kilometre is costing, how much a signalling equivalent unit is costing, how much a bridge is costing per square metre. And we can compare those costs with the original estimates in the business case. And we can also compare them with similar schemes around the world. So we've got a constant check and balance system, as I said, using this common cost language to make sure we remain on track. I don't want to go into the problems. The problems with cost estimation come if people say, oh, they take a very high level view, it's so many $1 million per single track kilometre, without looking at what makes up the route you're trying to do. It needs to be properly analysed. The system is not helped, and this again is going to offend people probably within the AIQS in Sydney and the RSS in London, is the use of a form of contract, the NEC forms of contract around the world, has led to a diminution of the number of people with proper competencies of measurement and valuation. That has to be addressed. In other words, you've got to have people who can measure and value to get this thing right. You can't simply take a flight. The only mitigation of that is that the use of AI. You can actually, on AI now, develop possible routes for railways, which you can then attribute with cost factors, where AI will start to give you a very strong lead as to what the thing is costing or should cost. And that's something else we need to do. Dealing with our young quantity surveyors, our young cost engineers just out of university, they will have done a lot of IT, frankly, at university. They will be expected to see things like AI come into play and how you do it. In other words, delivering what is basically an analog system of transport. Railways began in 1825, deliver it with digital methods in the 21st century. And you can control the cost that way. I'm quite confident you can.
So to me, that sounds like just another discipline where some education makes a lot of sense. So in a similar way that we need to learn to what extent the track building for high-speed rail is different from track building for normal speed railways. It sounds like an opportunity to train a new cohort of quantity surveyors specifically for high-speed rail, but then in extension also for other big rail infrastructure projects, with the objective to basically create a cohort of people that is able to reliably estimate projects like this. I mean, that would be invaluable for Australia, I think, not just for high-speed rail, because there will be many, many more stages, which are also very dependent on having accurate estimates that can be delivered against, but also for other projects in Australia that struggle greatly with cost overruns. If I look, for example, to Melbourne and the suburban rail loop, the initial budget, however it was determined, is only a fraction of what they're now blowing out just for the first stage, and it's just very, very difficult to do this, because it opens every door for the critics. It's basically a wonderful red carpet for the opposition coming in and accusing the last government of being stupid and negligent and all kinds of things. And for the industry, it's obviously a catastrophe. Yeah, if the trust in the delivery capability of the rail industry on cost and on schedule gets lost by the people who pay for the projects, I think that's pretty much the worst thing that can happen to an industry.
I'd agree totally with that. I mean, basically, if you have massive overruns, its effect on the public's perception of the industry, whether it be building railways, roads, any form of linear infrastructure, goes out the window. Once you lose people's confidence, it's very difficult to raise money and support for future projects. It actually stymies things. So there's a huge pressure on people to deliver this properly, but both to maintain the confidence of the taxpaying public in Australia and also to make sure that you've got confidence for future projects. And that comes down to education. You're absolutely correct. This is education, education, education. What are the standards for high-speed rail? How do we put them onto drawings for people to build? Which is the best way to put them onto drawings? Can we use AI these days for, because it is basically a repetitive form of construction. How do we then look at the costs accurately so that people can deliver it? The other thing is to make sure the design is substantially complete before the contractor gets involved on site. Now, I know that there is a proposal to use early contractor involvement, and that means you've got to listen to the contractors when they look at your schemes and say, yes, we see what you want to do, but for practical terms, the way in which we operate, we need to do it in a slightly different way. Listen to them and accept their views, and not simply go through early contractor involvement simply as almost a sop to the industry. We'll let them sit at the table. They can make comments from time to time, but they've got to be involved from day one, because you're talking about a massive manufacturing process, Frank.
Yes, and that's my understanding of early contractor involvement anyhow. So the way that I've seen it done before is that you actually involve the contractor in the design, or even have them doing parts of the initial design, and they will do it in a way that enables them to deliver against it later on. Yeah, because they know they will be in the driver's seat for that. So if they decide something stupid today and then tomorrow they are responsible for delivering it, and they basically fall over their own feet, that's not how it works. So I think this is an excellent opportunity to get buy-in from the supply industry to help creating a design which is not a pie in the sky thing, but can really be built.
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned the common cost language of the railway method of measurement. That is a form of elemental analysis. If we look, say, typically at a bridge has got foundations, it's got abutments, it's got piers, it's got a deck, it's got parapet. Every bridge has. Your original proposal may, and this is purely a hypothetical example, may be designed in reinforced concrete. Contractor may look at it with early contractor involvement and say, no, because he has an elemental analysis as opposed to a trade analysis, he can say, no, I can build the piers and the abutments of the deck. I'm not going to do it in reinforced concrete. I'm going to precast it, or I'll do it in steel. So you may finish up with a solution that's very, very different from the original drawings, but within the budget, because elemental analysis enables you to compare costs of different methods of construction. You could go from masonry to brickwork to concrete to steel, even to timber. That's what it allows you to do if you do it properly. And I hope that lesson has been taken on board by the High Speed Rail Group in Australia, and that's how they propose to go forward. Rather than let everybody use this as a development project from from day one, and the costs will go out of control as will the time.
So, for the current process of selecting advisory teams for the development phase of Sydney to Newcastle, what advice would you give? What do they need to watch out for to make sure that they remain in control, that they get the support that they need, but still with everybody pulling in the same direction?
Well, the first thing is to make sure they buy into the business case and what's going to be delivered and the constraints on the business case which are removable. The other thing is when selecting advisors, make sure they actually have the resources which they're trying to sell you. And there are very few quantity surveyors around the world who understand railway control systems, whether it be signalling, overhead line, power supply, operational telecoms, track, and also, as we're now having to do, understand the implications of the traction you use in the past. Make sure that they've actually got the people the resources to deliver these services they want to. Because otherwise, if you appoint them simply because of they're a big name or they've got a lot of people in the CV, they will learn on your job, and that'll affect your costs. In other words, make sure the people who say they're going to do it have the ability and competence to do it. I mean, it probably sounds a very modest statement by me. That's why I've been approached on the back of what I've done around the world. I am prepared to work with people. I'm quite happy to work with people, if only to make sure the lessons learned are actually fully understood. Make sure the people who are going to deliver this have the competence. It's a problem because this is a prototype. There are very few people who can actually do this, but you can use their skills as a mentoring process to your own young people, your graduates, your young engineers and cluster, to bring them in to make sure that you don't just buy the expertise if you've got to buy it from overseas, you also import it so that your own young people have an education, they can go on with future phases of this project.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We discussed this mentoring topic in my last episode with Steve Allday, who I think you know quite well. And I think it's a recurring theme coming from older folks in the industry like you and I and Steve, that the the industry should put a little bit more emphasis on utilizing the older folks, not just sending them into retirement, but actually utilizing this experience to mentor and to train younger people. Yeah, so that they basically consider working with best practices, and the knowledge doesn't just get lost in a seniority home or something like that.
Absolutely true. You have to ensure knowledge transfer.
Mm.
Got to knowledge. This is a publicly funded project. The knowledge should be invested in the public. You cannot allow groups of people to retain knowledge and take it down a commercial route that knowledge is financially very valuable and everything else. That knowledge isn't spread around. You've got to spread the knowledge for this. It's a big learning curve to go through. There's a huge opportunity here. And that goes for both consultants and contractors.
Yes, yes. So how will you get involved in Australia then?
Well, I've had 3 invitations already. I am thinking about it because I'll be quite honest. People say, "Will you come and do some work for us? Will you look at work?" At the stage of my career, my first excuse me, my first reaction is, I will only come if you give me mentees, people I can train, people I can teach and do it.
Yeah.
If you expect me to be operational at my stage of my career and my expense, then you've got a major problem. What I will do is come and train people. And the one thing with a project like this gives you huge opportunities to do so. You can do a section of the railway corridor. You can teach people about tracks, signalling, everything. You can take a bridge and work on the job with people and say, right, measure price the cost of this bridge and everything else. Now let's compare it with elemental analysis against what's happened elsewhere in Australia, elsewhere in the world. And people, bright young people, learn very, very quickly indeed. And it means the cost is kept to reasonable. I'm not saying people should be used cheap young labour, far from it, but people starting their careers are earning their corn, they're earning their salary, they're building their knowledge, and they're building a career where they can, at a later stage, transfer that experience, that knowledge to a new generation. What you don't need is a lot of expats and people like me at very high expense coming in and doing this job. Sorry to be so very blunt, Frank, but that's it.
Yeah.
You've got to, I would come to answer your question, delighted to come, delighted to share experience, but predominantly with mentees and training people.
It's such an excellent point, and it's the first time that I'm hearing this, that the first requirement or the first condition that somebody puts up, that he gets people who he can educate. It's not like, yeah, you have to pay for my relocation, or you have to grant me 6 weeks of holiday per year so that I can enjoy the Australian beach line or anything like that. Or I want to take my wife with me and all these things. But actually looking like the knowledge transfer, the legacy of your knowledge, if you will, is becoming so important towards the end of our careers, that it should really become a priority. And I really raised my head that you brought this thing up as a very first requirement, almost as a potential showstopper if that's not the case. And I will certainly take a leaf from your book. So when I'm the next time asked to do something, then I should make it a condition as well that I can transfer my knowledge. Yeah, and people think it works automatically, but if you have nobody there to be taught, then and everybody's busy with other things, then it just doesn't work. No?
Absolutely. Ironically, I used to have an office in Victoria Street, just off Blues Point Road in North Sydney, which is where I wrote the original rail method of measurement, which it was done on a scheme between Quakers Hill and Vineyard for what was then the Transport Infrastructure Development Corporation of New South Wales. It would be a wonderful opportunity to bring it back and teach people. This started in 2008, 2009. This is where it is now, and it's created the common cost language of the industry.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, High Speed Rail Authority has an office in North Sydney as well, of all places. So maybe
I enjoyed the Australian sunshine. The Australians have said my wife when she came with me occasionally, but no, the opportunity to contribute to the development of a young economy is exciting, and that's what this is about. Yeah. It isn't, people may accuse me of being pompous or pious or both. It isn't about making loads of money. It's about contributing to people development and seeing people grow around you.
And I think you would be quite surprised how North Sydney developed in the meantime. Can tell you that much. All right. Yeah. Michael, thank you very much. I cross my fingers that we will get to see you here in Australia and that you can contribute to this very, very important knowledge transfer so that we get it right. And we are not becoming another statistic in a long row of over cost and over schedule high-speed rail projects. Thank you very much for your time and all the best for coming over soon.
I look forward to it, and thanks for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye, Michael. Bye, everyone. Bye. Cool. Stop the Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you like the content, then the best way you make sure that you don't miss out on any of the future episodes, just subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you also get access to all the previous episodes, which I'm pretty sure there will be many that are of interest to you. Another thing that you can do to help not just your own environment, but the entire industry is to share this episode with friends and co-workers, because it helps more people in our industry to get educated, and an educated rail signaling industry is a better industry. With that said, thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon, and bye for now.